everybody, 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 everybody.
I'm a rapper, I'm not a poet. Poet, I'm not a rapper. Guess it's opposite there, cause you niggas just got it backwards. Got me sick to my stomach. Go up on my lantern. New trio is Frio, the most terrible tandem. Deliver shock value, but no, not Timberlanding. Critical observation alerting you ambulances. Clap on and clap off. Rap on and rap off. Hard times for hard rhymes, that concrete, that asphalt. If I did look twice, I guess that's her asphalt. May I assist you and score, get my pass out. Matter of fact, it's what you need. Need some rest, you just fatigue. See, technically I'm filing Mrs. Wallace, I'm Rashid. Know this beat is a banger, have no reason for anger. If I'm slightly deterred, you know I'm giving the finger. I'm a savage like Corey, but not in need of Topanga. Right like 90 degrees, you in the need of an angle.
Man,
that chauvinist clap.
Man, shout out to Club Monster and to allowing us to use that new intro music. What do you think about that?
That's that chauvinist clap. So if you ain't heard about them boys, go check them out. Club Monster. That's with a K. K-L-U-B. Monster. Check them out. Birmingham's finest.
That thing go hard.
Yes, sir. Yes, indeed.
Man, welcome to the FreeLunch Podcast. This your boy Tight, and we got BG with me. What's going on, BG?
Yeah. Here we go again. FreeLunch Podcast. What's happening?
Man,
baby?
we back.
We back up in this thing.
But this time we actually sitting across from each other.
Yeah, man. Live in the living color.
We live and in living color. Under some circumstances, I had to travel down to Alabama for a few days, but wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to get some sessions in, dude. So what you think?
We glad to have you, brother. Glad to have you back in the state one more again. So let's get this thing popping. Live and living color. The FreeLunch Podcast boys is in the building.
I would the people could see this setup. Huh? This homegrown. Yeah, organic.
We starting from the bottom. We starting at the bottom. Stay down till you get up.
But we on our way to the top. So I think it's that time, dog. You know, for each and every podcast, I like to get the people a little something, a few bars.
And dog, you ain't lying when you say the people asking about it, because the people sure falling in love with it. So I highly recommend you keep it going.
I gotta keep it going. Well, I do this. This is my other opportunity.
The people asking for it.
If FreeLunch the podcast don't jump for another year or two, when we get a lot of supporters that we need, you know, I got this to fall back on, man.
Well, you definitely got it, because the people have been definitely inquiring about it.
So can I do it for the vine?
Man, do it for the vine.
Rising up, back on the street, did my time, took my chances. Went the distance, now I'm back on my feet. Just a man and his will to survive. It's the eye of the tiger, it's the thrill of the fight. Rising up to the challenge of our rival. And the last known survivor stalks his prey in the night. And he's watching us all with the eye. Do-do-do-do-do-do. Of the tiger.
You never seen to disappoint.
Hey, I had to get him. You know, whenever I do one of these songs or one of these vines, I try to pick a topic or a song that's gonna kind of relate to what we talking about today. Did you ever notice that?
That embodies the theme. Yeah, man. It's always a good segue into the discussion that we have.
And I don't know if a lot of people know that, so I wanted to make certain I put that out there for the people that a lot of the time the song the song that I sing is kind of gonna relate to the topic today. Because today I'm gonna let BG. What we talking about today?
We talking about HBCUs today and the experience. Now, we do have to make the disclaimer that neither one of us with the HBCUs, hence the Eye on the Tiger lead in. We are alumni of Auburn University here in the state of Alabama. But in some form or another fashion, we have been touched by HBCUs. Personally, I have relatives, family, my parents, aunts and uncles that have attended HBCUs, as well as a lot of friends that have attended HBCUs. So even though I didn't have a direct connection to an HBCU, so to say, I still have been touched by an HBCU. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, and just kind of discussing, historically what the role of HBCUs, historically black college and universities, for those that don't know, what the role historically was, and if the role still exists in today's present time.
But are we going to do a comparison between a HBCU and a predominantly white institution, or are we simply going to discuss the relevance? How you want to take this show?
I mean,
I
think when in this talk there may be we will be able to maybe do some low level comparison, and then also I think we'll also be able to just to speak on the relevancy of those institutions, just from a third person, an outsider's perspective, which does count, because we are in a place with this platform that we can talk to people about it, and talk about our experience directly with, I guess, a quote-unquote white institution. But then just kind of draw the lines and from what we've heard, stories and things, people that we talk to, maybe, bring it together a little bit, have some comparison, and talk about the relevancy. So it's still noteworthy. We can still talk about it.
So you have two guys, BG and Tight,
two guys
who didn't attend a historically black college or university.
But we did attend the parties. We kicked it with the bros, so that's part of it. We got some of the experience.
And we about to talk about the relevancy of a HBCU.
Homecomings are off the hook. Shout out to TU. Skigging. Yeah.
Hey, I'm along for the ride on this one. I'm along for the ride.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to see how this one going to work out. But in all due honesty and respect, I think it is a good time to kind of discuss historically black colleges and universities, and really discuss in a lot of ways the relevancy that they actually play for a lot of us, right? So let's just dive into it. And actually what I wanted to do as a part of us diving into it is really reflect on a recent book that I finished about a year ago entitled Breaking the Lines, the Season in Black College Football That's Transformed the Sport and Changed the Course of Civil Rights. And that's actually a book by Samuel G. Friedman. And I hate kind of like throwing out these books that I read, because sometimes I see like it may be over the top, or I may be saying a little bit too much. But I found that book really, really interesting, because what it did was it talked about the relevancy that HBCUs play, specifically Grambling with Coach Eddie Robinson and Jack Gaither at FAMU, and how those two universities essentially broke grounds during the civil rights movement. So, for example, Coach Eddie Robinson essentially coached and trained James Shaq Harris. You ever heard of James Shaq Harris?
I've heard that name. Mm-hmm.
So James Shaq Harris is essentially considered the first black quarterback in NFL. And I had a chance to actually meet him when they were in the DC area. So that's one role that Coach Eddie Robinson and his great legacy. One of the things he did, and that's one of the roles that HBCUs played. Another one, and what the book discussed, and was Jack Gaither, right? Mm-hmm. So he essentially played the first football game where a historically black college played a predominantly white institution in Florida, and they kind of broke grounds there. So I said that to say that I actually said that to essentially say that during the civil rights movement and back during the time, even before the civil rights, with pre-slavery, historically black colleges and universities were a really essential and important fabric in the black culture, Southern culture, and just in educating African Americans.
Yeah, because, of course, civil rights time back, there were no institutions, I guess, colleges or universities where blacks could attend. So, of course, you see that there was definitely a need to have institutions that were designed to cater to people at that point in time. And so that right there just, when we talk about the relevancy, even though it's historic, it was important. Because you look at, just as a country, the first institutions in the United States globally were probably established around the 1700s, mid 1700s or even earlier for whites. And then the first black institution was founded in 1837. So you see that gap of time, over 100 years of disparity in terms of college education for black Americans. So, and looking at the fabric of our country, you say, well, that was a historical need, but then the question arises, well, is that still a current need, considering, some of the things that we face as African Americans in the country? Is that need still exist to where we need to be able to go to institutions that are, sensitive to where we come from, sensitive to our backgrounds, sensitive just to the way that we relate to one another, and just giving us the place to grow, culturally and educationally at the same time.
So, what's your thoughts on that? I mean, as we fast forward to modern day, one of the things that you actually kind of brought to my attention when we were pre-planning for this particular discussion was the discussion around just the transition from high school to college, right? Mm-hmm. So coming from BC Rain is the high school that I attended in Mobile, Alabama, and that being a majority black students attended that high school at that particular time, and then seeing them needing, or seeing the students maybe needing some type of transitioning from that high school to a college or university. Would you say that there's still a need today for the HBCU, or what are your thoughts centered around that, and really going back to thinking about your time in high school, and how would you have, how do you think your peers would have been able to transition to a college or university, both a HBCU or to a predominantly white institution?
Right. Now remember, everybody, that, like I said, we're talking about HBCUs from the outside of the fence. But to what you're saying, me too. My high school experience was very similar to yours in terms of the breakdown of the demographics in the institution. My high school was majority black, probably 90% plus African American students coming out of there. And then personally, I transitioned from high school into college. Going to Auburn, like we say, is a majority white institution. And so when I talk about it, I can talk about it from just my personal transition, going from a predominantly black situation environment to a predominantly white environment. And even though the white institution was kind of reflective of what I have experienced since I've been out in the working world, there was a lot of things that I experienced in that institution that I didn't experience in high school, from just from a diversity standpoint, and meeting people that, come from different places and talk a different language and have a different understanding and a different set of values. But then also just the maybe the lack of cultural sensitivity, whereas where you go into a place and you're going into a group of peers that look like you, that have similar stories that you have. Basically they talk the language, and then you have professors and administrators that have a similar story that you have, come from the same community that you come from, understand, kind of what it's taking and what you're going through as a student, and at that point in time, they can relate to you better. And I think that helps the overall educational experience. Not only does it create an environment that's comfortable for you, that makes it conducive for you to learn, but you also feel like as a kid, 18, 19, coming into college, you feel that somebody cares, that somebody's able to connect with you. And I think, that might be, what white students experience when they go to white institutions. They have that degree of comfort, they can easily assimilate and have study groups and all that kind of stuff. But for me, coming into a situation to where I'm the minority, it's a little bit difficult. It's a little bit more difficult when you're in a class of 100 and it's only 2 or 3 black students in there.
But that's a representation. Of modern day corporate America and where you're gonna work, right?
True, and it really is. It really is.
So if that's a representation, wouldn't it make sense to kind of get that experience sooner than later?
Yeah. But you
see what I'm saying?
And then we're all at a different. We all have kind of this different level of tolerance, and this, I guess, different level of maturity. Some people are more prepared to dive into a situation like that, where they're not as intimidated. They're ready for it, and if something comes up, they're able to handle it. But there are other people that need more of a gentle transition. They need a little bit more time, right? So as an 18-year-old or 17-year-old, you might have one, and I guess we are reflections of maybe being able to just step in there, and even if we can't right off the bat associate or group up with somebody, we can kind of talk our way into it and work with people. But that can be awfully intimidating to a point to where, as opposed to stepping out, a person may withdraw and they'd be like, and I need to get out of here. I might need to transfer to somewhere else. So I think it's good to have the option. I think it's good to have an option for those that may not be ready to just dive in and attack it head on at 17, to be able to go to a place, get the education, build your confidence, and then by the time you're 22, 23, you're ready to enter the workplace with a little bit more.
Why did you decide to go to Auburn University versus Tuskegee?
Well, and those were my two options. My parents are Tuskegee people. I grew up going to Tuskegee, going to homecoming, and still go back to homecoming. And then right down the road, 15 minutes, is Auburn University. So one of the determining factors was, of course, just the major that I decided to go into. It was available at Auburn, wasn't available at Tuskegee. So that was a determining factor. And then the other thing was just the financial aspect of it. With Tuskegee being a private institution, it would, of course, cost more to go there, and then it would be to go to Auburn, which is a state institution. So those are the two factors in terms of my decision. But then I made the decision, kind of based off of, I would still have the proximity to still be able to go down to Tuskegee and be able to share in that experience as best as I could. So those were my two things in terms of making a decision between, I guess, if we're talking about it, an HBCU and a majority, quote unquote, white institution.
Mm-hmm. The reason I thought about that and I asked was because, now that I reflect on my choices back when I was 17, 18 years old and deciding to go to Auburn, of course I wanted to go into the engineering program. But in a lot of ways, HBCUs at that particular point in our circle of friends at BC Rain, it was kind of it was almost looked upon as though it wasn't at the same level of a predominantly white school, as though you were taking a step back if you attended a HBCU. So in a lot of ways, some students may have called it the 13th grade.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's only 12 grades to graduate. So you graduate 12th grade, and then essentially they were just saying you're not going to a college or a university if you go to Alabama State, for example. You're going to the 13th grade.
Right.
So that influenced my decision in a lot of ways, because even from that perspective, call me ignorant, call me 18. But in a lot of ways, that was the perception that was looked upon by a lot of my peers. So I also knew I wanted to stay in state. In state, Tuskegee was an option, but again, I had attended a few summer programs at Auburn, and I had fell in love with that particular campus. But you made an interesting point that I've actually been sitting here pondering as you've been talking, and that point is really around that transition from that 17, 18-year-old to college, and essentially just having that support system. Because I think in a lot of ways that support system is important, and that's really going to determine how if you're even able to complete and graduate with a degree, right? Because that first year is really the toughest year, trying to transition from high school to college and having that support system. Because if we look back, and I was actually thinking about this, did we have much of a support system at Auburn? I think in the engineering department we did, because of programs like MEP. But if you were not a member of MEP, or you're not a member, or you were not a member of the Summer Bridge, or some type of program specifically designated for African Americans, then, or in that field, then I could see where the struggle could have been.
Definitely struggle. And then if you don't necessarily have that outgoing personality to where you just mixing and mingle, you'll be out there by yourself, man. And like you say, without those programs to where we kind of came in with a few friends and a few people that we knew were going in the same area, we kind of came in those programs with probably 30 or so people that we knew that we could connect with. But if something happened or somebody made a change or something like that, then you'll be out on your own. And then, of course, those people that were, like you say, were not able to take advantage of those situations. It takes a little bit longer to establish that network, especially when you've got people surrounding you that are not familiar with black people, right, that might even have, some segregationist type of feelings toward black people in this environment. So yeah, it's a tough environment to create that, kind of that network and that support system.
So I read an interesting article on blackamericawell.com. I want to get your perspective on this. Attending a predominantly white institution, do you think, or did you learn a lot about who you were as an individual? Meaning, who are you? In a lot of our recent podcasts, we talked about living your truth. We used the Simba and the David and all of that. But I read, and the reason I bring this up is because I read an article from Taraji P. Henson, essentially where she was being interviewed, and she talked about being a graduate of Howard University, and how attending Howard essentially, she learned who she was as an individual, meaning the story about slaves and just black people coming over and understanding your worth as an African American woman, understanding your worth as an African American woman, like I just mentioned, but also understanding, who you are as an individual and what your purpose is. And in a lot of ways, she said she gained that from her professors and from her peers at Howard University. At Auburn University, did you get that same type of understanding, or that same type of, could you have answered or can you give an interview similar to what she provided and really say, man, I learned all this about me, and now I understand who I am and where I'm going?
Probably not to that same degree. I mean, I could probably say that, because of some of the adversities and some of just the trials and tribulations that came along with being in that environment, of being in school and being in that particular type of setting, and how that, called me to draw on certain things and probably helped form who I am, but not to the same degree in terms of when you're getting these lessons and you're interacting with the professors and the way that they're interacting. Not only are they giving you the academia side, but they're giving you the academia side with that historical background and from that perspective of, we're here to make great African American. Make you a better African American. We're here to make you a better piece of the African American community. So not only are you just getting the ABCs and the 1, 2, 3s of the lesson, but you're getting that plus the desire and the drive to use that to push your community forward. I think that's the piece that we might not have been given the advantage of having, is getting you the education to push the community forward, which is what those HBCUs were built on. It was built on, okay, we're going to give you the lesson, the literature, and the history, but by giving you this, your responsibility is to take that back to your people.
Are they doing that today, though? Are HBCUs doing that today? So I started this whole discussion off with talking about Samuel G. Friedman's book and how Coach Eddie Robinson and Coach Jack Gaither essentially left a legacy, right? So they were essentially pioneers by, if you look at today, James Shaq Harris was considered the first black NFL quarterback. Now we had 9 black NFL quarterbacks start this past season. And then if you look at Jack Gaither playing the first interracial football game, and then you look back and you say, okay, now you see HBCUs unfortunately playing predominantly white institutions. A lot of that is around funds, but they're playing the games. So if you fast forward to today and kind of getting back to our original question about relevancy, what about from that perspective, right? Because are HBCUs now leaving a presence so massive that we look back and say, man, this is that moment, similar to Coach Eddie Robinson and Jack Gaither?
Yeah. And I guess some of that question will stand to be answered as we go down the road. But I guess another way to look at it, though, was, well, what would our situation be like if there were no HBCU? If you just subtract HBCUs and all the graduates that came from them, what would our situation be like then? If we just solely had to depend on all of our African American college graduates and master degree people coming from those institutions, it probably wouldn't be as many, because now you've got more competition for all the the select spots in these other institutions. So I just really still feel like, even though because our society is changing, and for us as a community, I think it's reflective of where we need to be as a community. It's like, where are we putting our energy, right? And by us kind of being in between this, well, I want to push the culture forward, I want to do good for black American, all that kind of stuff. On one end, of course, on the other end, it's that funding that you're talking about. It's like, we need funds to do this, and we want to get the money to do this, and so it kind of creates a conflict of interest. But I just really do feel like, even with it no longer being the breeding ground for athletes, HBCU is no longer really being that. Athlete will probably go to a white school before he goes to HBCU, because that's maybe a more direct line to professional ranks and stuff like that. The need is still there to have that option to go and take advantage of it. Some people need that experience. You know, and some of the listeners can probably attest to that. So, people that maybe come from predominantly white areas and high schools and all this kind of stuff, but they have the desire, they want to connect, they want to be able to go in and have that support system and maybe even learn from, a more black perspective. Get your education with more of an emphasis on, you just being an outstanding African-American contributor to your community. And so that need still exists. And so really the focus of the institutions as well as us out here is to make sure that the message is still being delivered that way. That even though you go to a HBCU, that message is not getting diluted and it's just this, this so cliche surface level message to where the people not really getting kind of what Taraji was talking about, getting that type of experience. So we can't definitely speak to that. I guess, we set this thing up to have it more interactive and volumes to this thing. We could have some of our HBCU friends come in and talk to that piece.
I think we should. I think this is a good introduction to kind of spark the debate, right? I don't think we don't have the answers, surrounding the experience of going to HBCU and essentially to Raji's point, being able to speak on how you can learn who you are as an individual and how you can essentially move a culture and move a community forward.
Right.
In a lot of the instances, we can't speak on that, but we can speak on, our experiences and our indirect experiences from relatives that have attended HBCUs. Personally, I think that there is a relevance. And the reason I say that there is one, I think you kind of raised that point. It could be a culture shock for a lot of high school students, essentially in urban communities, that to just pick up and leave home and not have that support system. And I think that having a young person that's never been around the majority, having to go to a predominantly white institution with lack of that support can be a challenge. So I do think there's a relevance. On the flip side of that, I also think that I would like to see more of the pioneering that was done by HBCUs back in the early civil rights movement and even pre-civil rights, right? So I'd like to see more of that, taking a stand on issues and saying, hey, this is the direction that similar to what we talked about in similar to one of the podcasts where we kind of discussed the black church,
right,
and the role of the black church,
right.
And essentially, if you can get the black church and HBCUs to communicate again and to work together, then you can see more of an effort, right?
Yeah,
but you don't even see black colleges and black churches connecting.
There's no connection point. You're right.
And so you got all these individual institutions, and you got the HBCU that's about education and educating the people and pushing the community forward. You got the black church that's supposed to be about the same thing, yet they don't talk.
Yeah, seems like it would be a pipeline that every at least a greater percentage of the kids that go to church grow up, and you just funnel them, especially the churches that are in close proximity to those institutions. They would just be like a pipeline from the church to the school.
But do you hear about a lot of that?
No. Not in my personal experience in terms of no direct outreach or anything like that. And so is that some of this whole thing to where we as a people don't value our own stuff, and we feel well, we ain't gonna even consider that because it's of low value. We gonna make all our efforts going to these other institutions, and so we don't even talk to the people the kids in our community. Kind of like you're talking about that whole 13th grade.
That's the whole 13th grade.
Nobody values it, so we're not gonna even. we're not gonna talk. We're not gonna talk to that because that's not what we're aspiring to do. We're aspiring to go to Harvard and Yale and Brown and Columbia and all those kind of things, which is fine, Stanford and all that kind of stuff. But
Grambling was considered the Notre Dame of HBCUs back in the day.
That was pride.
That was pride.
That
was pride. And I learned so much and actually became such a fan after completing that book because I saw the role that was played and how even in a lot of instances, the students it was a grassroots effort to even keep the school alive,
Mm-hmm.
And so now it's like to the point, you don't even see these black churches and these HBCUs talking so much together, and it's subconsciously we've devalued our own stuff.
Our own stuff.
We devalued it, like you said, and subconsciously we were saying that that's the 13th grade. And I don't know if they did that in Selma or what have you, but that was kind of the mindset that, if you go to Alabama State or if you go to this other university, that's the 13th grade. You're not even going to a college or university. And it's kind of devaluing our own stuff versus making Alabama State, using that as an example, making that an elite Harvard or making that a Stanford, coming together and saying that, I don't know, Xavier is the, we have Spelman and we have Morehouse, but saying Xavier is the Stanford or what have you institution, and just continuing to push these HBCUs forward to be on that same level and at that same standard that these Ivy League schools are considered.
Mm-hmm. And you'll hear it if you ever have a privilege to have, some black people that have gone to a majority white school and some black people that have gone to HBCUs, you'll hear it. You will definitely hear the debate as to which is better, which is of higher quality, which degree means the most, and all that kind of stuff. It could be the same degree in the same study area, and there'll be a debate about which is of more value. Now, to this though is the one thing that we do have to talk about when we talk about this is just some of the visual progression that you actually see just in the physical institutions and just the buildings.
Well, it go back to the doughnut, right? It go back to the church and the doughnut.
It could.
We done had a church fund for 10 years, but you ain't seen a new doughnut put on the church, and vice versa at these HBCUs. You see tuition continue to go up, but you don't even see no type of dorm renovation or no type of stadium renovation or anything.
Like the whole Grambling situation a couple of years, two years ago, something like that, where the players just basically had to boycott because their practice and weight room and stuff was in such
mold all up in the
bad
weight room.
condition. Yeah. So that's another thing. When you just talk about a person's desire to go, how does that affect it when you can go to this school and your registration and all these things are online, you can do it from the comfort of your home, versus maybe still going to a place where you got to stand in line and register, and you might get promised. I've had this happen to some of my friends from high school that they went to schools on scholarships, athletic scholarships, and then when they actually got there, the scholarship fund and then turned out to be what they had been promised. So that probably plays a role in some people just being a little turned off by HBCUs. And so that's a question that the institutions themselves will have to answer in terms of, improving people's desire to want to come there. Like, you've kind of got to be up to some standard, even though, certain situations, like we talked about, certain situations do make you more resourceful as a person, that you have to use some ingenuity if you don't have certain things, if you don't have certain supplies and things like that at the school, you got to come up with some creative ways to accommodate, and that may make you, more resourceful in the future. But there are some minimal things that do need to be in place when you're talking about being an institution of higher learning.
So just to summarize, for this particular topic, because I actually think that, and that's the reason why I like this, right? We can get this thing going, and then we'll spark some thought and some conversation, and hopefully when we revisit this topic again, we can actually invite and have some of our listeners that attended the HBCU join in on the conversation to kind of give a different perspective and some more insight into their particular experience, right? But at least what we've done today is kind of spark the conversation. And for me, and I'll do a quick takeaway what I learned and then allow you to kind of finish us off, BG. But I two things was, number one, subconsciously how we devalue our own stuff. We being African Americans devaluing, and in the example today we talked about how we some consider Alabama State, for example, the 13th grade, and kind of devaluing that institution. But secondly was how we really should see more communication and see more connection between HBCUs and black churches, because in a lot of ways everything's kind of individualized, and each entity kind of does their own thing and not really develop this pipeline like you kind of said, where you're going to these churches, black churches, and you're saying, okay, developing these summer programs similar to what I did at Auburn, and developing these summer programs for these upcoming seniors, and kind of educating them on what this HBCU can provide for you, and how we can make you a better student, but also a better citizen and a better community, and better in the community or what have you. So I think we do need to see more of those type of connections and programs get started to really push the culture forward, and to push the communities and advance the communities. So that's kind of my two takeaways from the conversation.
That's good.
I think there's more to it, I think there's more to this dialogue and this conversation, but I would like to have some other perspectives involved in the conversation when we kind of have that talk.
Exactly. Yeah, that'd be good. And I love my HBCUs, and I just, would like to see the rest of my people have that same appreciation for them. And I would like to just see a day where we just remove that whole thing, that whole division line between, African Americans that have gone to majority white institutions and those that have gone to HBCUs, to the point to where it does us no good where we're having an argument and we're devaluing, each other's accomplishments and things like that. That's truly offensive. So if you went to a white institution, that's good. Be proud of your degree and keep it moving. HBCU, if you did the same thing, be proud of that and move on. And that's really focused on how we can pull those degrees together and make our situations better for those that are coming behind us. So once again, we're able to do this live in living color, man. We got through it on an HBCU talk, and neither one of us went to HBCU. But when November come around, you couldn't tell me I ain't go to TU. I be balling and parlaying,
I'm gonna
baby.
be interested to hear the feedback on this one. I think we're gonna get some critiques and some criticism on this one.
Well, we take it. We like the criticism, because what that means is that people are paying attention and they have something to say. And the more that you say, the more this conversation can go on, and we could probably get closer to really having some type of true impact. So if you got criticism, feel free to share it with us. I'll go ahead and give the information, the contact information. So if you do have something you want to share with us, you want to just drop us the line, feel free to do it. We're on Twitter, FreeLunch Pod C. FreeLunch Pod C on Twitter. Also, every Friday we have a Free Lunch Friday, where we'll just have some topic that, you can just chime in. It's Friday. You ain't doing nothing at work anyway, so you might as well get on the Twitter. Also, we got the Instagram Free Lunch Podcast. Free Lunch Podcast, and then the blog, FreeLunch Podcast, FreeLunch.blogspot.com. And don't forget to check us out right here every Thursday, iTunes and SoundCloud. FreeLunch Podcast. Free lunch, one word.
Man, shout out to Auburn University. I got to shout out that this upcoming football season.
War Eagle.
I got to give a quick War Eagle, and I got to lead us out with this one right here. Can I lead us out with it? It's the eye of the tiger. It's the thrill of the fight, rising up to the challenge of our rival. And the last known survivor stalks his prey in the night. And he's watching us all with the eye of the tiger. We out, y'all. Love y'all. Thank y'all for listening.
Be sorry, you gotta pardon me. Pardon me, I'm speaking it awkwardly. Charles Barkley, barking, they ain't biting. I'm getting that green broccoli. Properly giving props to the problem, fulfill prophecy. It gotta be better than that. It gotta be obsolete. Obviously, niggas rolling the dice, and this ain't Monopoly. My purpose was to do it on purpose. Fucking apology. Go.